of the College Daily Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. This is the PFF radio show dedicated to college football and daily fantasy sports, and we have a great show coming up. With me is Wes Huber, the PFF Fantasy College Football Lead Writer. You can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Wes. And also, we are very pleased to have joining us Jordan Case, a writer for Fantasy Insiders and DraftKings Playbook. You can follow him on Twitter at the Jordan Case. Jordan, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. It's great to have you on the show to talk some football, and it is Week 12. Conference championships are just a few weeks away, and then there will be the bowl season, the playoffs, and then draft season for all the players entering the NFL. There is so much that will be happening in the coming weeks and months, and at Pro Football Focus, we've got you covered with all the college football content you can handle, and with the PFF Fantasy Gold Package, you can get it all for only $29.99. Okay, fellas, with the end of the season in sight, the path to the playoffs is becoming clearer for the top teams in college football. This Tuesday, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee issued its third iteration of the playoff rankings. The top 8 teams all have important matchups that they must win in the next few weeks on the path to the playoffs. Some of those games are against each other or other teams ranked in the top 25 by the committee. So in the first half of the show, Jordan and Wes are going to look at the key matchups left on the schedule for each of these top 8 teams. And then in the second half, Jordan and Wes are going to give us their DFS plays of the week. All right, guys, let's get into it. Jordan, let's start with you. Up at the top is Clemson. They are 10-0 in the ACC Atlantic Division. Over the next 2 weeks, Clemson plays Wake Forest and South Carolina. Both of those teams are 3-7, and then they will likely play in the ACC championship game. Right now, North Carolina looks like the likely opponent that they will play in that game, assuming North Carolina wins out. North Carolina is ranked number 17. UNC has won 9 straight games since losing in the first week of the season by 4 points to South Carolina. So let's assume those are the 2 teams playing in the ACC championship game. What do you think of that game? And if UNC wins, does it deserve a spot in the playoffs?
I think that game is going to be a lot of fun. Clemson is a very dynamic offense with a very talented defense. I think Deshaun Watson is one of the best college players in the country. And I think he'll probably end up picking apart that UNC defense that just can't stop the run, and when teams get to run on them, it opens up things more in the passing game. And then he'll hit Artavis Scott and all kinds of other talented receivers like Deion Kane. And I think they'll win at least by 2 touchdowns. UNC, great offense, but they haven't played many good teams at all. So I don't think, even if they do win, that they'll get a playoff spot because their schedule has been very weak.
Wow, all right. So, I could definitely see that, and Clemson has been very strong up to this point. Wes, let's kick it to you at number 2. That's Alabama. In the SEC, they are 9-1. They're in the West Division. Alabama plays non-major Charleston Southern and then in-state rival Auburn over the next 2 weeks. Assuming they win those games, they will then play in the SEC championship game, probably against Florida, which is 9-1. And Florida is ranked number 8 by the committee, so that would be a strong matchup. Florida has lost only to LSU. Let's assume that Florida wins out and plays in the SEC championship game. What do you think of that matchup, Florida against Alabama? And if Florida wins, should they make the playoffs?
Well, first of all, the SEC needs to do away with the FCS matchups this late in the season. As much as the playoff committee punishes the Big 12 for not having a conference championship, the SEC should see now. Alabama, I think, is good enough to overcome that situation, but I think that FCS matchup is just embarrassing for the conference, and that needs to be done away with. But as far as Florida goes, I'm really not excited about that game. I did read recently that Will Grier could possibly be reinstated if his appeal is heard in time, and he wins. Now, if that were to happen, I think they would have a lot better chance. The issue with Florida, they have a great defense. Their offensive line is playing great. Their running game is really clicking right now. But yeah, Treon Harris is just a huge problem. I've mentioned it on several pods previously, and I mean, we have a really good player that is able to do a lot of things. But at 5'11", he's just not able to lead that passing attack over the towering defensive linemen in front of him. And honestly, the way they've played since the LSU loss, which was the first game that he played in, it seems that they have backed their way into the SEC East crown. I mean, like I said, they lost to LSU. They narrowly, I mean, barely beat Vanderbilt and barely beat South Carolina. That's a combined 7-13 record. That's going to be just an embarrassing loss if they play that way against Alabama. Well, consider this: when since Harris has taken over for Greer, Harris grades out as the 111th out of 142 quarterbacks in the country and 60 out of the 74 Power 5 quarterbacks. And the stats are just as ugly. He's completing 51.9% of his passes. He's thrown 4 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. He's allowed 14 sacks over those games, and he has a 32% completion percentage when under pressure, which is just completely just. I mean, it's horrible for that offense that is going to need him to help deliver on some third downs, and if they're going to compete against an Alabama. Think about the Alabama defensive unit grades. Overall, they're first as far as PFF college standards. Against the run, they're first. They have the 7th best pass rush. Their secondary is graded as the top unit in the country. Only Ole Miss and Texas A&M have scored more than 20 points against Alabama, and only Tennessee and Arkansas have prevented Alabama from scoring 30 or more points. Florida's. I mean, the way they're looking right now, going into the Alabama team that we're seeing right now, we're looking at a blowout.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there, Wes. And speaking of blowout, Ohio State plays 2 big games these next 2 weeks, neither of which is highly likely to be a blowout, but you never know. They have Michigan State first at 9-1, and then the next week after that they play in the Big House against Michigan at 8-2. The college committee currently has those two teams ranked numbers 9 and number 12 respectively. Wes, what is your outlook on those 2 games?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There will be no blowouts. Ohio State could always pull away late in a game. You never know with that team what players are gonna live up to their potential and which ones are gonna kind of sit back and wait for the others to do their thing. But against Michigan State. Michigan, and then even against Iowa in the Big Ten championship, if Ohio State were to go that far, we're looking at 3 very solid matchups with very good defenses going up against very, very strong running games. Individually, the Michigan State game, well, I mean, up until last week, Connor Cook was looking amazing. His numbers, his overall grade for the season was just hugely elite for college football this year. And one of the things that college football has suffered, one of the areas, is that quarterback play. And Connor Cook has been one of the best in the country and will likely be a top pick at quarterback next year in the draft. But he injured his shoulder last week against Maryland, and he tried to play through it, and he came back out on the field. And just he was not the same guy. I'm very concerned because I don't want with the Big Ten finding as much criticism for their lack of statement wins up to this point. Same with the Big 12. The Big Ten really needs these games to justify its record so far this year. And we need a healthy Connor Cook going up against Ohio State, and we need one of those teams to win against a completely healthy roster on the other side. So and last week against Maryland, Maryland actually outplayed Michigan when it came to like overall yardage. I mean that's just almost embarrassing for a Michigan State program that is trying to be taken seriously. And one of the big issues, I'm pretty sure it was one of the plays that he allowed. Left tackle Jack Conklin, one of the best prospects in the country at left tackle, actually allowed a sack, a hit, and 2 hurries last week, and I'm pretty sure one of those was the plays where Connor Cook was injured. And going up against Ohio State's pass rush, which is PFF College's #1 in the country, they're going to need him to be on his game. So I mean, that could be a problem. And then another issue that I've been doing some research, Michigan State is allowing 26.7 points and 353 yards, total yards per game against Big Ten opponents, and that is an issue because Ohio State all season has allowed 20 points to be scored twice and over 350 yards twice all season. And Michigan State has been doing that since conference play has started. And another issue, and something that JT Barrett is going to definitely exploit, is the Spartan secondary, graded as the 18th worst in the country. They allow 250 yards per game and 12.7 yards per completion. Now, when we get down to the Michigan game, we're looking at a much better defense, to say the least. The game's going to be played in Ann Arbor, and I mean that is huge for the Wolverines. And outside of spotting opposing teams around 50-some yards per game in penalty yardage from Michigan, only Alabama and Ohio State can claim to have defenses with the dominating presence that Michigan brings. No less than 9 guys in that defense, Chris Wormley, Maurice Hurst, Willie Henry. I mean, their defense is outstanding, and it's going to populate the NFL over the next couple of years. But you could look at the offense, and that is definitely an area that could be an issue. Now, Ohio State's offense hasn't been the best in the country, but it's been one of the top 25 in the country so far, whereas the Michigan has not. But over the last 2 weeks, Jake Rudock has been the highest graded quarterback in the country, and his play has definitely picked up. We'll see if that's due to opponents or whatever. They go up against Penn State this week, so that should give a little more insight into whether he's greatly improved or if he just has gone up against some lesser opponents. But yeah, I mean, it's a very even matchup as far as defense goes. But if I'm a betting man in the situation, I'm definitely going Ohio State in both games. I just think their overall talent is higher than both of those teams. I think Michigan might actually have the advantage on defense as far as talent level, but overall it's definitely Ohio State. And with Urban Meyer only losing 2 games since he's been at Ohio State, and who am I to argue that run's going to come to an end?
All right, Wes, great stuff there. Now, Jordan, let's go back to you. Notre Dame is the 4th-ranked team by the committee, 9-1, independent. Obviously, Notre Dame would be undefeated if not for a 2-point loss early or in the middle of the season to Clemson. This week, the Irish play against Boston College, 3-7. In a kind of cool situation, they're playing the first football game in Fenway Park in close to 50 years. And then next week in the season finale, Notre Dame faces Stanford at 8-2. The committee has Stanford ranked number 11. That will be a big matchup for them. Stanford is a physical team. Jordan, what do you think of that game for Notre Dame?
I think that's going to be an incredibly tough game for both teams. I know that both teams are very offensively minded. Stanford not as much, but I think it'll be something maybe low 20s, but probably expect something even lower than that. I think it'll all come down to how Notre Dame can handle Christian McCaffrey. He's someone referred to him as a Swiss Army knife, and that's just completely accurate. He can do it all. He's an incredibly talented player. He'll get it done on the ground, through the air, out of the backfield. Whatever he needs to do, he's going to do it to help his team win. And Notre Dame is allowing 163 rushing yards per game, which isn't completely terrible, but it's something that Stanford could definitely look to exploit. and I think that they will look to pound the ball with McCaffrey. It's just annoying that they don't get him touchdowns, which drives me crazy. But on Notre Dame's side, it's going to come down to if Deshaun Kaiser can control the ball, control the tempo of the game, and not turn it over. If he can do that, I think he'll give Notre Dame a solid chance to win, with C.J. Prosise and Will Fuller being two very good college football talents that Stanford will have to try to contain them as well. But I think Notre Dame just edges that game out very closely. They've been tested on the road. They've been to Clemson, as you mentioned, how they just lost by 2 points and played in a good football game. They've been to Temple and to Pittsburgh, who are both pretty solid football teams, and they beat them in their own houses. So I think Notre Dame could pull that one out, but it will be a very close game.
Yeah, definitely, especially with that game coming on the road. Now let's go to Iowa, the fifth team and really the first team outside of the playoffs right now. Obviously, they're 10-0 in the Big Ten, the West Division. Unlike Ohio State, Iowa has actually beaten two ranked opponents in this season, Wisconsin and then Northwestern. For the next couple of weeks, the Hawkeyes play Purdue and then Nebraska. Assuming that they win those games, and they should, let's assume that they will also play Ohio State for the Big Ten championship. Obviously, if they won that game, they would make the playoffs. Jordan, in that scenario of them playing against Ohio State, do you think they could take down an undefeated Ohio State team in the Big Ten championship?
No. I have always thought this throughout this entire year that Iowa is a very overrated football team. They have a slightly tougher schedule than Ohio State, but the two ranked teams that they beat were Wisconsin and Northwestern, who are both pretty offensively challenged. And teams like that just aren't going to beat Iowa no matter what. But the other teams that they've played are the likes of Iowa State, Illinois, Maryland, Indiana, teams that just aren't going to have a chance to beat Iowa. But that game, I think Ohio State wins pretty easily, but I also don't think they're going to go into that game undefeated, so we'll even see if it is Ohio State, because I think Michigan does edge them out in the last game of the season.
Wow, bold call, but no, I'm definitely with you there. I think whoever it is that is playing against Iowa in that game, I think they have a very good chance of making that game something of a mockery, which is, I think, kind of unfortunate, but yeah, that will definitely be an interesting test, especially to see who it is that ends up being in that game from the Eastern Division. Now, Wes, let's go to you, and let's go to the Big 12. Sixth by the committee is Oklahoma State. They lead the Big 12 right now as the only undefeated team in the conference. 2 weeks ago, they beat a highly ranked, undefeated at the time TCU team, and yet they are still behind Iowa and Notre Dame. These next 2 weeks, they play at home against Baylor, 8-1, and then Oklahoma at home, 9-1. Both of those teams are ranked. Baylor's number 10, Oklahoma is number 7 by the committee. Let's start with that game against Baylor, which will feature two really high-scoring offenses. Wes, do you think that Oklahoma State will be able to beat Baylor at home?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. Listening to Jordan talk about Notre Dame. I don't think Notre Dame, if they win out, I don't think that's going to be the factor that will push them through, because I think a team from the Big 12 is going to overtake them. And to me, looking at the games last week, give a really good picture into what's going to happen this week. Last week against Oklahoma, Baylor was right in the game. They were playing at home. They actually, at the end of the third quarter, Oklahoma led 34-27. Not a big deal with that offense. And the Sooners had actually only generated 38 more yards. And each team had run 64 plays, and they had nearly identical time of possessions. Going into the fourth quarter, everything broke down. Jarrett Stidham, the true freshman quarterback, he only completed 2 of 4 passes, threw an interception, only led the team to 1 first down. Oklahoma was able to control the clock, had a 5-1 time of possession advantage in the fourth quarter. And Stidham still has some growth, and which is entirely expected from such a young player. But it gave a lot of insight into what we can expect in those crunch time situations. That doesn't mean he can't play better, but he will need to play significantly better than that in order to compete with the big boys. Well, as far as Oklahoma State, Jordan also mentioned Iowa State, and I completely agree with what he said about that being a bad Ohio State or Iowa State team. But the new Iowa State is much better. Sam Richardson was benched actually back in Week 8 against Baylor for Joel Lanning, and ever since Joel Lanning has taken over for Iowa State, they have played so much better. And actually, the momentum in the Baylor game completely shifted when he came onto the field. He's able to do things with his legs that presents a completely different challenge to opposing defense as well. So we have an Oklahoma State team going up against Joel Lanning and an up-and-coming quarterback in Iowa State who's playing at home, so definitely playing their best ball. And Oklahoma State actually entered the fourth quarter down 31-21 against Iowa State, but from that point forward, they dominated the game. They won the time of possession battle 2-1. They held Lanning to 3 of 6 passing for 22 yards and an interception. And Mason Rudolph, who has been all that and more, completed 8 of 10 passes for 110 yards and led his team to 2 scores. I think tossing that game into a bad win category is a little unfair. The Cyclones are more than a formidable opponent than their 3-7 record would indicate. I honestly think that was a great win for the team, and it really showed the type of backbone that they had going into that game with a double-digit deficit going into the fourth quarter. And honestly, with Lanning and freshman running back Mike Warren, the Cyclones might be a team to watch next year if they can continue to add talent to that program. And kind of touching on the Heisman talk that we had last week about Mason Rudolph, I did some research looking over J.W. Walsh, and I came to the conclusion that instead of considering J.W. Walsh as, Mason Rudolph comes off the field in this situation, that situation. Honestly, with a lack of a running game that Oklahoma State has, basically when J.W. Walsh is on the field, it's like he is the running back for the team, and it's Mason Rudolph handing the ball off to him. So I think that's a factor to consider there when Heisman talks come up. But anyway, as far as the combination, I don't blame the team whatsoever for bringing J.W. Walsh out there, because the guy is willing to just throw his body into the blender to get yardage, and that's something they don't need Mason Rudolph to do. They need to keep the talent healthy. Well, as far as the game against Baylor, I just don't see Baylor coming into going playing in Oklahoma State's house and pulling the undefeated season out from under them. I think this is going to be another win for Oklahoma State, and it's going to set up a great matchup against Oklahoma.
All right, and speaking of Oklahoma, let's go ahead and move there. The Sooners are at number 7 by the committee. They are 9-1, obviously in the Big 12. Similar to Oklahoma State, OU has 2 big matchups to close the season. This week they're playing at home against TCU, and then next week on the road in that matchup with Oklahoma State. Wes, talk a little bit about that game with TCU, and then assuming that both OU and Oklahoma State win this week, talk about that final matchup of the season with OU playing at Oklahoma State to close out the regular season.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate for TCU. I was really looking forward to seeing this game, and with Trevone Boykin looking highly doubtful and Josh Doxson out for this season, the young quarterbacks they put on the field last week were not impressive. That they not to say that they won't at some point, but it really just shows you how good Trevone Boykin is, that he was able to play at such a high level, and it's really unfortunate that he possibly won't play this week. Now, if he does play, great, but I don't know. They played Josh Doxson when he didn't need to play, so we'll see. And the problem being the Sooners' defense. They're one of the only Power 5 teams that ranks in the top 20 in both offense and defense. And I mean, honestly, Baker Mayfield has received all the credit for their offensive explosion this season, and some is definitely earned by his great play. But I think a lot of the credit needs to go to their offensive coordinator, Lincoln Riley, who they brought over from East Carolina. He brought his air raid variation that he promised would include a very large role for the running attack, and he has lived up to that promise. The running game for Oklahoma was just as important as the passing last week against Baylor. Samaje Perine was just, I mean, huge last week against Baylor and just shredded that Bears defense. Look at it this way: in 2014, Oklahoma was only able to put up 14 points against Baylor. That just shows you the incredible turnaround that team has taken. And when he was at East Carolina, they had the 6th ranked offense. And with the talent infusion of Oklahoma, it's obviously gone to greater lengths, and it's catapulted Baker Mayfield and a lot of players in that offense. I don't see TCU beating Oklahoma without their quarterback. It's not likely to happen. I don't think they have the defense to hold that offense down and keep it at a low-scoring game, which is what they would need. Maybe grind out a victory on the ground. I just don't see that happening. Going into the Oklahoma State game, man, that is a tough game to predict. Honestly, after this week, when we see what Oklahoma is able to do to the TCU defense, even though it's going to be a little skewed without that offense coming back, and then seeing the Oklahoma State team play against the Baylor team that Oklahoma just played, we'll get some insight into a possible result going into Week 13. But man, it's going to be one of the best games of the year, and with two of the best quarterbacks in the country, and we've got some exciting football ahead.
Yeah, Wes, 100% agree there. That should be a fantastic game. And really, I think the big question is, whoever wins that game, will they end up making the college playoffs? Will they end up jumping Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, or Notre Dame if all of those teams win out? Will an undefeated Oklahoma State make the college playoffs, or will a one-loss OU make the playoffs? Wes, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that Notre Dame's hold, even though they're going to be playing Stanford in the final game, which honestly, if I'm choosing the winner there, I'm going Stanford. I think that they have a more balanced attack. Now, I know that's definitely not what the high number of Notre Dame fans want to hear, but man, the Stanford offense and defense is pretty formidable. I just don't know if they'll be able to score enough points to keep up with Stanford in that game. Honestly, I see them dropping out. Even if they beat Stanford, I see the Big 12 winner, the way they scheduled their end of the season, the way that the inter-season schedule, the way they did that. I think they'll be the winner. Will be that team, the 4th team in the playoff, especially after what happened last year, where we had TCU and Baylor really upset at the end of the year, and I understand that, but in all honesty, they just need to add a champ. They need to add 2 more teams, and they need to add a conference championship and be done with it.
All right, and Jordan, let's go to you to close this out. The 8th team by the rankings is Florida, 9-1 in the SEC in the East Division. Now, we earlier talked about a scenario in which Florida would play Alabama in the SEC championship. First, Florida has to make it there, and in the final week of the regular season, they will face in-state rival Florida State, which is 8-2, and Florida State is ranked number 14 by the committee. What do you think of that game? That's always a tough game. Do you think Florida will end up winning that?
Yeah, I think Florida will win that one, and I'm not even sure how close it'll be. I know Florida has their own offensive struggles, but the run game it's solid with Kelvin Taylor. He gets the job done. And if Will Grier is cleared to come back, I think Florida does win that game, especially playing at home in the Swamp. That's just a ridiculously tough place to play. Those fans are very passionate and they're very loud and give a huge advantage to Florida. But I just don't see Florida State going in there. They've only played and winning. They've only played two solid defenses in Boston College and Clemson, and they put up 14 and 13 points on those two teams. They have scored points on other like NC State's not a bad defense. They put up like 35 on them, but this will be the best defense that they've played all year, in my opinion. I think Florida's defense is a little bit better than Clemson, so I think that's going to give Florida State fits. But yeah, I think Florida does win that game, and I think they do make it into the SEC championship game, where they will get beat by Alabama. I don't see Florida putting up a whole too big of a fight against that Alabama team, which Florida might not score. If we're being completely honest, that Alabama defense is the best in the country. I don't see any way Florida beats Alabama, if we're being honest.
All right, guys. I think a fantastic conversation there, really illuminating the path to the playoffs for these 8 teams, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens in the next few weeks. But great conversation. In fact, it was almost as great as 1 week fantasy football at DraftKings, where it already feels like the playoffs. With millions of dollars being won each week, every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code PFF. With your first deposit, you can play for free in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000. Enter PFF for a free entry now at DraftKings.com. That is DraftKings.com. All right, guys, it is time for our Week 11 DFS plays. Jordan, let's start with you. Who is the quarterback that you like this week?
I absolutely love Keenan Reynolds for Navy, especially at his current price tag. He's $8,100 on DraftKings, only $8,600 on FanDuel, and he gets the illustrious matchup of Tulsa, a team that is just completely inept on the defensive side of the ball, giving up 311 passing yards per game and a little over 220 yards per game on the ground. Keenan Reynolds is a true dual-threat quarterback who went completely nuts last week, scored, I think, 4 rushing touchdowns. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but just had a great game. Navy is clicking. They have a team total of 40, which is one of the highest this week, and at least 4 of those touchdowns will come from Keenan Reynolds, whether it's from his arms or his legs, however he gets it done. They as a team have 38 rushing touchdowns this year and 17 just by Reynolds himself. So I think he has a ton of upside, an incredibly safe floor, and should be the base of your cash games if you're playing the late slate on Saturday.
All right, Wes, let's go to you. Who do you like at the quarterback position this week?
Yeah, one question I have is how in the world did the AAC not schedule a Houston-Navy matchup to decide the West? That just is beyond my comprehension. You have 2 undefeated teams in the conference. I don't know how are we going to decide who's going to play there without a winner, but who knows. Anyway, my play is, and this is going to be a DraftKings specific play. Now he is on FanDuel, but he comes in at $9,100 on FanDuel, $6,600 on DraftKings, and is probably the highest value quarterback on the slate, on the DraftKings slate of the day, and that's Chad Kelly going up against LSU, which has not been the LSU defense that we've been accustomed to. And besides averaging 30 fantasy points per game this season, his floor is 15 points, but this is a guy that can put up 60 points, which he did last 2 weeks ago against Arkansas. He has 7 rushing touchdowns in 10 games, averages 322 yards per game, 2.3 passing touchdowns per game. And despite Mississippi State being the 31st ranked passing defense, they're giving up the 31st least amount of passing yardage. Kelly has passed for 300 yards against Alabama, Auburn, Vanderbilt, which are each solid defenses, but of course the Alabama defense is the best. Honestly, at $6,600, he's a no-brainer play for me.
All right, yeah, good stuff there. And let's go to the running back position. Jordan, who do you like out of the rushers this week?
I love Trayvon McMillan from Virginia Tech. He's going up against a North Carolina team that just can't tackle like their defensive line. I don't know what's going on there, but they're allowing 206 yards per game on the ground, which is good for 109th in the country out of like 128 teams, I think. The game script might end up being pretty unfavorable for him because Virginia Tech is a 6-point underdog, but they love to have the workhorse running back, and I can't see a scenario in which he gets less than like 25 carries. And if it's still close or Virginia Tech has the lead at the end of the game, he might get 30, 35 carries against that awful, atrocious defense. I think the 100-yard bonus on DraftKings is all but a lock, and he should score at least one touchdown. So I think he has a very safe floor, and any running back against this North Carolina team has great upside.
All right, Wes, let's go to you. Who do you like in the running back position?
All right, well, we don't have an over-under because we're still waiting on the status of Anu Solomon, whether or not he's going to play. If he doesn't play, I don't see it affecting the game. I think Gerard Randall is going to be able to lead that offense just like he was to beat Utah last week. But I'm going with Kalen Ballage of Arizona State. He comes in at $5,200, and honestly, it's a great play going up against an Arizona team that is not a top defensive unit. And we have to consider that these teams average north of 30 points a game on the season, so we're probably looking somewhere at around a 65-point over-under, which will leave plenty of carries and scores for both backfields. Now, for Arizona State, the carry split has been around a 57-43 split, with Ballage receiving the lower end of that spectrum. And despite less attempts than Demario Richard over the last 3 games, Ballage has actually led the team in yardage and touchdowns. He's averaged 101 yards, 8.2 yards per attempt, and a touchdown and a full yard after contact per attempt. Arizona is the 82nd run defense in the country. They're allowing 182 yards a game. They've surrendered 23 touchdowns to opposing running backs. And Ballage is just a great value.
All right, I hear you there. Now let's go to the wide receivers. Jordan, who is the guy that you like at the wide receiver position this week?
This one kind of seems like a lazy pick, but it's too good to pass up. Juju Smith-Schuster of USC. He's in the 7,000 range on both sides. And against Oregon, with USC having a team total of 34, that's way too cheap. Oregon's secondary has been getting torched all year long. They've given up over 300 yards per game through the air. And Cody Kessler hasn't been looking to throw the ball quite as much this year, but he still has the upside. Or Smith-Schuster still has the upside with such a bad defense and a high team total. He's been over 100 yards receiving in 6 games this year and has scored at least 1 touchdown in 8 of those games. I think both of those things should happen, 100 yards and a touchdown. And I think he's just very, very underpriced relative to his expected production this week.
Yeah, he's really been one of the most productive and consistent wide receivers in all of college football this year. Really kind of up there with Coleman and Doxson. So, yeah, it will be an exciting game to see what he can do against a defense that is used to letting wide receivers do what they want. Now, Wes, who do you like at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, speaking of Schuster, I also graded the USC Colorado game this week, and what's really impressed me is that he's playing right now with a broken hand in a cast, and he's putting up those numbers despite the injury. At wide receiver, I like, and this is only on DraftKings. It's not a game offered on FanDuel. Is UNLV wide receiver Devontae Boyd going up against San Diego State. Now, UNLV is a 16-point underdog and likely to be playing come from behind throughout the entire game. But since Blake Decker has returned at quarterback for UNLV in Week 9, Boyd has averaged 8 catches, 122 yards per game, 25 fantasy points per game, and has a touchdown in 4 of 6 games played this season with Decker under center. Now, the San Diego State defense is a tough opponent. They're number 20 in passing defense this season, but the averages that I mentioned came against the top passing defenses of Boise State. These are top 40 defenses: Boise State, Colorado State, Michigan, and San Jose State. He's I think a guy that you can put into your lineups almost regardless of the matchup. I'm not sure how he would do against an Alabama or a Michigan or I'm sorry, an Ohio State. He actually had a great game against Michigan, but for me, he's a great play at $5,200 on DraftKings.
All right, now let's go to the tight end position on FanDuel. Jordan, who do you like there?
I like Cody Cole out of Arizona State. As Wes mentioned earlier, there's not an over-under for that game yet, but earlier in the week, Pinnacle offered up a line of Arizona State -6, and I think if New Solomon sits out, it helps Arizona State out. It'll keep the game a little bit closer, and it'll keep the passing game more alive, which only helps Cody Cole. That being said, Arizona is allowing over 270 yards per game through the air. They're averaging, like Wes said, I think it's 32 points per game, something like that. And Mike Berkovich, he should look to Cole in the red zone as he has all year long. Huge target, solid production all year. I think he's the top play for your dollar on FanDuel as a tight end.
All right, and Wes, how about you? We know how much you love the tight end position. It's just, like the cream of the cream. Tell us who you like at FanDuel this week at tight end.
At tight end, I like whoever's $2,000 and is going to get me 3 points. So, no, honestly, I really like Jordan's play. Basically, I'm looking for guys that are going to be on the field for the majority of the snaps. Cody Cole is a guy that plays. He's got one of the highest percentage of total snaps played of all tight ends in the country. He's a great play. I'm going to go with Harrison Hanley of Utah. Now, we just found out that Devontae Booker is out for the year. He's having surgery. And that Utah offense is going to completely change moving forward. But prior to losing Booker, Hanley had started to emerge. The Utah offense had to play come from behind the past couple of games, and they've looked at Hanley, and that's basically the result of losing a couple of tight ends. I'm not going to mention their names because I can't pronounce them, but it's provided an opportunity for Hanley. And over his last 3 games, Hanley has a long reception in each of those games of 39 yards, 21 yards, and 59 yards. The 59-yarder last week he took to the house, and against Arizona, he's averaging 44.3 yards and has a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 games. Over the last 6 games, due to those injuries I mentioned at tight end, Hanley has played greater than 75% of the total snaps for that team, which puts him on the field to receive a higher chance to see targets during the game.
All right, I really like that play there. And then finally, let's close it out with the flex position at DraftKings. Jordan, who do you like there?
I like Brandon Ross as a great value play. He opens up a lot of salary. Earlier this week, we found out that Wes Brown received a suspension. He's out indefinitely. So Brandon Ross will step back into a lead back role. He's averaging like 5.2 yards per carry this year and has the matchup with Indiana, who is a miserable defense, giving up 170 yards per game on the ground. Maryland has a 34 team total, and they're somehow favored in this game. Not really sure how that's going to pan out, but if they do keep the lead, game script should play in his favor, and he'll get 15 to 20 carries against this bad defense. If he doesn't get at least 80 yards and a touchdown, I'd be very surprised. I know versus a couple bad defenses earlier in this year, he went for 130 and 150 yards. I can't remember exactly who it was, but he did it on like 15, 16 carries in each game. He has the upside, and the floor is there with his price. I think it's hard to pass up on him.
All right, I like that play. And then Wes, finally, who do you like at flex this week at DraftKings?
All right, I'm going to pluck another guy out of the UNLV San Diego State matchup and go with running back Chase Price. Again, it's only on DraftKings, $4,300. Now, here's a shock. UNLV is really, really bad against the run. I mean, really bad. They're ranked 106th and at 203.4 yards a game. They're a lot worse than that. They've given up 5.53 yards per attempt. 25 touchdowns on the ground. They're one of the worst run defenses in the country, period. I almost feel like teams are their backups in a lot quicker because they get such huge leads, and it almost improves their run defense because they're not playing against such high-level opponents. San Diego State, they've employed a 65-35 carry split in favor of Donnell Pumphrey, which is completely understandable. Donnell Pumphrey is the playmaker, but Chase Price has got a lot of talent. Since week 5, Price has averaged 17 carries, 93 yards per game, and has a touchdown in 5 of those 6 games. And we're looking at like I mentioned before, San Diego State is a 16-point favorite, and they're gonna have their running backs just eating up the clock the rest for the majority of the game, and it's going to be Chase Price in there at 35% of those carries. And I think I was doing some late research. I didn't write it down, but Chase Price in the games where San Diego State has won by 25 plus points, he's averaging 20 carries, over 100 yards, and over a touchdown per game. He's a great play, $4,300, and you should pepper your lineups with him.
Yeah, that game split information right there is really fantastic stuff. All right, Jordan, thank you so much for being on the show. Everyone be sure to follow him on Twitter at @TheJordanCase. And, of course, you can read his work at Fantasy Insiders and DraftKings Playbook. And that will do it for this edition of the College Daily Slant. Be sure to tune in next episode for our discussion on college football and, of course, our DraftKings and FanDuel Week 13 plays. You can catch us on PFF Radio, subscribe to the show on iTunes, listen to the show on Stitcher and Blog Talk Radio, and watch the show on YouTube and the Fantasy Sports Network. For Wes Huber on Twitter at PFF_Wes, I'm Matt Friedman, Matt F. the Oracle. Thanks for tuning in.